Okay, so we're following up on genetic clusters today. And what I've got on the screen right now, this is I did my mother's clusters so that I could get one step closer to a few brick walls on her side. This was done back in 2019 when you could do genetic clusters through Genetic Affairs using your ancestry DNA. And then they put a stop to that. And now Ancestry has a new tool called Matches by Cluster in Pro Tools. So you can do it again through Ancestry DNA, which is great. This, you can see, you can barely see these match names because the Ancestry database is so huge that the clusters you end up with are many. They contain many, many matches. Very, very large compared to clusters that you might see in MyHeritage. So this is what you're looking at. And let me bring up the MyHeritage clustering because it's just a little easier as far as a diagram goes to show. Let's see what we've got. All right. So this is the MyHeritage clustering, and it's a kinder, gentler screen because it just does not have the numbers of matches. So each one of these squares represents a match. And each cluster is made up of a series of matches. And let me talk to you about the practical application of this. So let's see. Can you guys all see the screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are two types of clusters that you're going to see. And this is an example of the most common. The most common cluster that you'll see is that everyone in the cluster is related with a common set of grandparents. And when I say grandparents, I mean grandparents at any level, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. So everybody will share what we call the MRCA, and that's how it's referred to. It's the most recent common ancestors. And so in this cluster, you can see that you've got a set of great-great-grandparents, and everybody in the cluster comes from this same set of most recent common ancestors, the great-great-grandparents. All right, and then let me show you, just one sec. Let's see. It's just kind of messy. So in this is a less common cluster, but this is another kind of cluster and what you might see. And sometimes what happens is it's not the case where everyone in the cluster is related to each other. Okay, so they will all be related to you, but not necessarily to each other. So you can see how this is. There are two different sets of great-great-grandparents. And you'll still, you personally, so here's us, you'll still have to determine who the MRCA is. That's your job to put those pieces together to determine what's going on in the cluster. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But in this particular cluster, these people over here aren't related to these people over here. But you are related to each of the matches. So do you see how that goes? So it can be a little confusing, but I want to talk to you about the practical application of these things. So the goal is this is my genetic cluster spreadsheet. let's see, let me get to the right cluster here. You guys see this? Let's see. All right. So I have a lot of clusters. Some are on my tree already. I put this in a spreadsheet because it's easier to see what's going on. And within each cluster, I've identified every match and the most recent common ancestor from the tree in each cluster. So for example, this couple, they are on my, this couple, they are on my family tree. This couple's on my family tree. Many of these couples are already on my family tree. And so that's just a confirmation that I absolutely do tie back to them genetically. Okay. But when you have a brick wall, that's where clusters can come into great benefit. So let me go to this particular cluster. Okay. So this is, let's see, cluster 36. Let me see. They're also in cluster 33. Okay. So the goal is, like I said, to identify that most recent common ancestral couple with a cluster. And that first example is the one that you'll see most likely. And it can be a huge benefit to you. So others may, so some, like I said, some of the cluster ancestral couples you'll recognize, they're already on your tree. Others may be further back and you haven't gotten your tree back that far, but you know then that they belong on your tree. And so that's the benefit of clustering. So recent clusters will have a high number, the matches within a recent cluster will have a high number of shared centimorgans. And a centimorgan is basically, it's a term used to represent the amount of DNA that you share with someone else. And in this case, with how much DNA you share with a match. So like I said, a recent cluster will have a high number of shared centimorgans. It's often the clusters that with matches that share low numbers of centimorgans that have an MRCA that is much further back. And these can be the most helpful. So a question people often ask is, how many centimorgans constitute a legitimate match? And generally, when you're looking at these matches within a cluster, ancestry DNA, for example, does not include matches that share less than 8 centimorgans. So at 8 centimorgans, a false positive rate is about 6.4%. But it decreases with as the number of centimorgans gets higher. So at 10 and a half centimorgans, you're already at a 95% chance of being a truly legitimate match. And it just keeps going up from there. So I think I was talking to Angela about this a couple months ago. We were talking about this, and by the time you get to 14 or 15 centimorgans, you can be sure that it's a legitimate match. So you look at the trees of each of the matches in the cluster you're working on. So some of the matches will share their trees, and other matches maybe have 1 or 2 names in their trees or no tree at all. It's your job to take those trees back if you truly want the cluster to benefit you and you want to be able to identify that common ancestral couple within the match, within the cluster, excuse me. And what's done with these clusters, it's called a dirty trace. So you're not going to be tracing a tree like you would your own, where you're documenting everything. You're trying to take this tree back as fast as possible. So you do a real dirty trace. And I have binders with trees from my matches where I've just taken them back super quick. And you can use any means possible. And that way, as you can see here, you can identify the common ancestor. So we've got this Daniel Fowler and Mary Jane Rollins for each of these matches as I've taken their trees back, or as they have trees that go back. Some I haven't taken back far enough, or their trees don't go back far enough, and they have a Fowler line, so that they're going to get there. But as you can see, trees start to go back. You can identify that common ancestral couple. And in this case, I used this cluster because this was a brick wall for me. But as the trees started to develop, I can see, oh, there it is. You know, so far I've got, 8 or 9 trees that have this common ancestral couple. So what do you do with that? Let me see.
So Kathy,
yes.
you're so let's I'll drag that back up.
Go for it.
So let's say that first one, W. Calderfields.
Uh-huh.
So that, are you trying to just say, okay, I'm related to this W. Calderfields?
Yes, he is within a genetic cluster. So people show up as you cluster, you get your DNA clustered through either Ancestry DNA or MyHeritage. They will provide you, like I showed you earlier, and I'll pull that up. They will provide you with this series of auto clusters. So they auto cluster your DNA, and you can actually do it on your own, but it's a lot faster if you do it through one of these 2 companies auto clustering. So for example, here is an example of a cluster. And each of these squares represents one match. So you have this group of matches.
Match, meaning one person that's working.
One person from your DNA match list that belongs in this cluster together. And you're all in this cluster together. Sorry, my desktop is kind of messy, but you're all in this cluster together because generally you all share a most recent common ancestor. In this case, in this diagram, it's a set of great-great-grandparents. So these are all matches within your cluster, just as an example, right?
The idea to say, okay, I'm related to this Calderfield, so I want to look at his or her tree and see if it can take me back any further than what I already am. Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, in a roundabout way, what you know is, so here are the list of all the matches within this cluster. You're all going to, so most of the time there is one common ancestral couple that you all tie back to. And in this particular cluster, that's the case. As I've discovered, so W. Calderfield's here, he ties back to Daniel Fowler and Mary Jane Rollins. Okay. So does this match, and all of these right here where you can see Daniel Fowler and Mary Jane Rollins, they are all off to the right. I wanted to see who the common ancestral couple was in this cluster, because I knew that this cluster, and let me show you another diagram so it can help explain it better. Okay, so here's a cluster illustration. I have this set of 3rd or 4th great grandparents right here on my tree that I know I tie back to, John Cartret and wife. Okay, and there are a number of matches that come from this particular couple within clusters 33 and 36. Okay, so I know that this cluster is a cluster that goes back on the John Cartret line. And I didn't know anything beyond him. But I knew that this cluster would help me go beyond John Cartret through DNA, because the paper trail ends. All right. So I have all these other matches that match at lower centimorgans. that match through this set of great grandparents, Daniel Fowler and Mary Jane Rollins, this couple, and every single person in the cluster comes through this set of this couple. Okay. So this is a huge perk for me because although this couple would be maybe 2 generations earlier on my tree, I know they're on my tree now because I've been able to determine so far that nearly every person in the cluster comes through them. So I come through them as well because we all tie back to them genetically. Do you see what I'm saying?
But you don't yet know how many generations? Or where they're
I
at?
know that it's 2. Well, I know now because I have confirmed it now, but I'll get to that. But because I was able to see genetically that this couple likely is on my tree 2 generations before John Cartret, just based on ages and times, right? And because the cluster substantiates that, I was able to then start researching more with this couple in mind. And what I was able to do is make the connection. I was able to, because as it was, I was only looking at these before DNA. I would be in communication with descendants of this John Cartret, right? And we would research together and I'd look at the paper trail and we were all exhausted with the paper trail. But now that DNA points to this couple as being a couple generations earlier on my pedigree chart, I was able to communicate with these other matches who are more distant matches because they match much earlier, but we are all in a cluster together. And I was able to find some old letters that one of these people had in their possession, which connected this John Cartret to the son of Daniel Fowler and Mary Jane Rollins. So what DNA can do, and let me show you another illustration of this.
So
So
on
what-
that spreadsheet, all of
Yes.
those people where it has over in the C box on your spreadsheet, where you
Yes.
typed in those 2 names, that means you've actually confirmed with them, or that means that
No, they have no idea about any of this. They just are descendants of Daniel Fowler and Mary Jane Rollins. They didn't know anything about my John Cartret, or all I wanted to do, once I could tell that this cluster represents that the most recent common ancestral couple on this cluster. So as you're researching these trees, you're looking for common last names. And then what starts to emerge is a set of a couple will start to emerge. Well, everybody ties back to this couple in this cluster, right?
But did you contact them and ask them if they?
No. So what happens is some of the people will include trees, and that's great. They may already have a tree that goes far enough back that you can see this couple on them, on the tree. Others don't have a tree, so you're going to have to do a dirty trace on their tree. And so there's a lot of effort that goes into determining this most recent common ancestral couple for this cluster, but it was so beneficial to me to take all these trees back on my own, people who hadn't done their own trees, because then I could see this pattern emerging. Oh, everybody ties back to this same couple. And so do I. But I just didn't know it until doing the work in this cluster. So do you see what I'm getting at? But then once you determine who the couple is and you think, okay, this is a couple 2 generations back on my tree. Now I have to make the connection. I have to confirm that with further research. And I was able to with these letters. So let me also show you another.
But did you personally look at their tree?
Oh, for sure. Every
Oh,
single
okay.
one.
Oh,
And
okay.
every single tree. Hold on and I'll show you. Every single tree.
So were you able to do that unilaterally, or did you have to reach out to them and say, hey, can you
No,
send me your tree?
just do it. So I have these binders, and for each cluster, I have for each cluster, I have a series of trees that represent every match in that cluster. And when I was first doing this back in 2019, it's painstaking because there are a lot of people who don't have a tree on there. They may list like one grandparent or two grandparents. You have to go from there and you have to fill in a lot. And there are some trees that, you can reach out to people and say, hey, could you provide me your tree, or at least your grandparents' name, so I can take your tree back, or it is painstaking. But when you have a brick wall that you've worked on for 20 years and you can't get past this one couple, then it's worth it. So in this case, it was worth it to me. It was wonderful. Let me show you this other tool. So once you identify the most recent common ancestral couple, which was this, for all the matches in that cluster, myself included, I wrote down all of the children of this couple. And then, and this is when I was still hypothesizing where I might fit, where my John Cartret might fit, right? And so here is my mother. I don't have her name down, but here is John Cartret. She goes all the way back to him. And I began to see some things in the paper trail as I was trying to confirm this with the paper trail. I began to see some things that led me to this particular son. So this is a program this is from DNA Painter, which is a great site online. And it has a tool called What Are the Odds? And that WATO is just an acronym for that. But it's wonderful because you can take your most recent common ancestral couple, and it also helps if you're looking to find out who someone's birth father or birth mother is. You can plug in the possible person. You plug in all the matches with their amounts of centimorgans. And this is such a great tool. It will give you it'll make a statistical analysis of what you've put on. And you're going to plug in who you think is the hypothesis. And here, let me show you another one, just as an example, that'll give you some negatives. So based on statistical parameters, it will tell you what the possibilities are. So let me go to my dashboard. And here we go. Let's see. So here's someone I was helping with a birth great-grandparents, second great-grandparents, I think. So you can see this. Can you guys all see this?
So 300 centimorgans means guaranteed, pretty much.
Oh, absolutely. Anything above 15, you're related. But you need to determine how. So, for example, these are all the matches that will help this man who I was helping determine for sure which son he might come through. Okay, so we knew from the DNA that these were his, let's see, where is he? His great-grandparents, but we didn't know through which of their grandchildren, which of the grandsons he came through. So you plug in all the matches, you put him down as a hypothesis. The hypothesis is in blue, and you can see that the program will give you a statistical analysis. It'll say, hey, it can't be this. This is based on the DNA. It can't be this one, but here are the possibilities. Anything green is a possibility. And the higher the score, the stronger the possibility is. Turned out that he came through this man. So it was such a benefit. And the more you know, the more matches you can plug in on this particular program, the quicker it'll narrow it down for you to where you belong. I'm just showing you this because these are some great tools that you can use for DNA to identify genetic relationships. And there are other tools on this site, and I'll get back to our clusters in just a second. There are other tools on this site that will help you with genetic analysis. One particular tool, let's see, this is great. If you're trying to determine what your possible relationship with somebody might be, you enter the amount of centimorgans. Here, let's just do as an example, 250 centimorgans. The chances are these relationships, anything outside of those relationships is statistically impossible, basically, unless there is, unless there are some unusual circumstances like, what's the word I'm looking, endogamy, when you have populations that have endogamy where they are very close-knit populations that stick together and don't marry outside of first cousins over and over and over, that kind of thing. So let me go back to this. Let's see. So you can, it takes some work. It takes a lot of work because you're looking at possibly taking all the trees back in your cluster. But this is a beautiful thing because now through genetic research, after researching all the trees from my other matches, I was able to take my brick wall and take it back 2 generations. So right here, there's a man named William Fowler, the son of Daniel and Mary Jane. And my John Cartret is his, or excuse me, it's his, my John Cartret's wife is his daughter. But none of that would have happened because if it hadn't been for these DNA clusters. So you can't rely on the people you match to tell you how you're related. You have to take their trees back, or you have to analyze their trees and start looking for common surnames, and then start narrowing it down to a common ancestral couple. And I have a number of genetic clusters that I'm working on right now that are taking me farther back on a number of lines. So the benefit of these DNA clusters is huge, especially if you have lines that are, maybe at your second or third great grandparents still, and you've looked and looked and looked and you've exhausted all of the paper trail resources and you can't go any farther back than that. You can identify a common ancestral couple in these genetic clusters, and you know that that couple is on your tree. You just have to now you have a clue. How do I make the connection between where I'm at and this couple that I know I'm related to genetically? So I don't want to overwhelm anyone, but this is a huge tool that can be used for, let's see if I can open up this.
Do you work for the FBI too?
No, but it's really no different than when in law enforcement do, it's really no different than the people in law enforcement who do genetic research to determine, to go, what they do it the opposite way. They will look at the matches of their suspect, and they will determine the most recent common ancestral couple as well. And then they take all of the descendants down. So they know it's one of the descendants. And then they start looking at things like, well, here's a descendant. He's the right age. He's fits the profile. He lived in Chicago. He was in Chicago, during the murders. And then they go to the people who fit the profile, who are descendants of this most recent common ancestral couple. Then they follow up with a DNA sample if the suspect is still alive. And in that case, recently with Brian Koberger, that's exactly what they did. They used genetic DNA. I mean, they did DNA analysis, and they took something out of his garbage can. But it starts with identifying that most recent common ancestral couple of the matches. So it's an amazing tool, and you can use it to further your tree.
Mhm.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop.
Thanks so much, Kathy.
That's amazing.
That was great. Thank you. So